Looks like something you'd find at a flea market. The chain snapped. The pendant hit the tile and skidded across the cafeteria floor. 200 students went quiet. Phones came out. Nora Bellamy knelt down. She picked it up. She wiped it clean with her thumb. Her hands did not shake. She stood, looked Grant Calloway dead in the eyes, and said 7 words. "You still have a chance to walk this back." He laughed. His friends laughed harder. Nobody in that room knew what she was. Nobody knew about the garage her grandfather built board by board. Nobody knew about 14 years on a training mat. Nobody knew the old security guard across campus was about to recognize a movement he hadn't seen in 30 years. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought a quiet girl carrying a tray was an easy target. By the end of that semester, an entire college would learn otherwise. Every small town has a story it still tells at dinner tables. This one belongs to a quiet college town in the Midwest. It happened on a Monday morning in September. Nobody thought it would matter at first. A young woman walked into a dining hall carrying a tray. She did not know she was about to change how a whole campus saw strength. She was not looking for trouble. She never did. But trouble has a way of finding people who carry something worth protecting. This is the story of Nora Bellamy, and a young man who thought he could break her. He was wrong. Not because she fought back right away, because she didn't. That part nobody understood until it was too late. Nora arrived at Millbrook College on a Sunday afternoon. The campus sat in a small valley. Old oak trees lined the walkways there. Red brick buildings stood along the quad, worn soft by 100 years of weather. She had transferred in as a junior. Her old school hadn't fit her. Too big, too loud, too easy to disappear in, for the wrong reasons. Millbrook felt different. Smaller, slower, the kind of place where strangers still said good morning. She hoped it would feel like a fresh start. She carried 2 bags up 3 flights of stairs, no elevator. Her legs didn't mind. She'd spent most of her life climbing things harder than stairs. When she opened the door, a girl was already there. The girl was unpacking a box of books. She looked up, startled, then smiled too quickly. That was the way nervous people smiled. "Hi, you must be Nora. I'm Callie. Callie Sutter," she added, like the full name might help. Nora set her bags down and smiled back. "Nice to meet you, Callie." Callie Sutter was small and quick-moving. She had tired eyes behind her glasses. She worked 2 part-time jobs to help cover her costs. She mentioned this within the first 10 minutes. She said it almost like an apology. "I know it's a lot, sorry. I talk when I'm nervous." "You don't have to apologize for working hard," Nora said. Callie blinked, like she hadn't expected that answer. They spent the evening arranging furniture. They traded small details about their lives. Nora mentioned she'd grown up with her grandfather. She didn't say much more than that. Callie didn't push. She just nodded, the way kind people do. Around her neck, Nora wore a small silver pendant. It was shaped like a mountain, worn smooth from years of touching. Her grandfather had given it to her as a child. He'd carved a small mark into the back himself. He'd done it late one night, at his workbench. It was the same mark he'd used on every training space he'd ever run. That went all the way back to a rented room above a hardware store. Ironhold, he'd always called it, in one form or another. A place, he told her once, was supposed to hold you steady. No matter what came at it, she never took the pendant off. Not to shower, not to sleep. It wasn't jewelry to her. It was a promise. That first evening, Nora took a walk around campus alone. She wanted to learn the place before the crowds arrived. The quad was mostly empty. A few students tossed a frisbee near the fountain. Old maple trees lined the walkways, leaves just starting to turn. Somewhere a bell tower rang out the hour, slow and heavy. She passed the humanities building, a squat brick structure covered in ivy. A side door stood propped open. A woman in her 60s stood there, sorting through a box of books. "You look lost," the woman said, not unkindly. "Just exploring," Nora said. "I'm new, transfer student." The woman smiled and set her box down. "Professor Whitfield. I teach American history, mostly. You'll probably see me around." Nora Bellamy. Something flickered across Whitfield's face at the name. It was quick, and then it was gone. Nora didn't notice it. She was busy looking at old photographs in the hallway behind the professor. They were black and white images of the campus, decades old. "This place has more history than people realize," Whitfield said, almost to herself. "Most students walk right past it." "I'll try not to," Nora said, and meant it. She didn't think much more about the exchange. It was a small moment, one of dozens that first week. The kind that blur together when you're still finding your way. She had no way of knowing Whitfield would remember her name later. For a very different reason. That week passed the way first weeks always do. Long lines at the bookstore. Half-remembered building names. The particular loneliness of eating alone before you've made friends. Then the relief of finally not having to. By Friday, Nora had found her routines. The library's quiet third floor. The dining hall's least crowded hour. A decent route for morning runs along the river path. She hadn't found trouble yet. That was still a few days off. The next morning, Nora walked to the dining hall alone. Callie had an early class. Something about accounting she wasn't looking forward to. The hall was loud, full of students catching up after summer. Trays clattered. Laughter bounced off the high ceilings. Nora got in line, picked up eggs and toast, and looked at for a seat. That was when she saw him. Grant Calloway stood near the center of the room. He was surrounded by teammates. He was tall, built like the football player he was. He carried the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. His father's name was on a building 2 blocks away. Everyone on campus knew who Grant Calloway was. Grant made sure of that. Nora didn't know him yet. She had no reason to look twice. She just wanted a seat and a quiet breakfast. She was halfway across the room when it happened. A foot came out from one of the guys at Grant's table, Dean Finch. Grant's closest friend, always laughing a beat too loud. Nora's foot caught it before she could stop herself. Her tray tipped forward. Eggs, toast, and orange juice hit the floor. The crash turned heads across the room. The table erupted in laughter. Nora stood still for a second, looking down at the mess. Her cheeks burned, but she didn't let it show. She'd learned a long time ago what a red face gives people. Some students were already filming. That was just how things worked now. A moment like this could travel faster than she could walk away from it. Whoa. Careful there, Grant said, grinning, not moving to help. You're supposed to walk, not skate. More laughter followed. A few phones came out. Someone started recording without even thinking about it. Nora bent down to pick up her tray. That was when Grant noticed the pendant. It had slipped out from under her shirt. He reached down before she could stop him. He pulled it, snapping the thin chain. "What is this?" he said, holding it up, turning it in the light. "Some kind of good luck charm?" He laughed, showing it to his friends. "Looks like something you'd find at a flea market." Nora's jaw tightened, just slightly. She said nothing. Grant tossed it. Not far. Just enough to make a point. It landed near her feet, skidding across the tile. He stepped near it, almost on it, like he hadn't noticed. Maybe he hadn't. It didn't matter to Nora. The message was the same either way. The cafeteria had gone quiet enough to hear it land. Nora knelt down slowly. She picked it up and cradled it in her palm. She wiped it clean with her thumb. Her hands did not shake. She stood, looked Grant directly in the eyes and spoke. "You still have a chance to walk this back." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Something in how she said it made nearby tables go quiet. Grant blinked, caught off guard for half a second. Then he laughed it off, playing to his crowd. "Or what? You gonna cry about it?" Nora didn't answer. She turned, picked up her tray, and walked to the trash can. She emptied it, then walked out of the dining hall, spine straight, steps even. She did not look back. Behind her, the laughter started up again. It sounded a little less certain than before. Callie heard about it before lunch. By then, half the freshman class had seen the video. 30 seconds of grainy footage, titled something like "New Girl Gets Wrecked." Callie found Nora on a bench outside the library, sitting alone. The pendant hung back around her neck on a knot she'd tied herself. "Are you okay?" Callie asked, sitting down beside her. Nora nodded. "I'm fine. That was really messed up." "What he did?" "It was," Nora agreed. Her voice was calm and steady. Callie studied her for a moment. "You didn't even yell at him. I would have lost it." Nora looked down at the pendant, turning it between 2 fingers. "Yelling doesn't fix anything," she said. "It just gives people a show." Callie didn't have a response to that. She just sat with her, quiet, while students walked past. That night, Nora sat on her bed with her phone in hand. She'd promised her grandfather she'd call every Sunday. But this felt like a night that needed a call, too. He answered on the second ring. His voice was warm and worn, like an old wooden chair. "There she is," he said. "How's the new place treating you?" Nora almost told him. The words were right there, at the edge of her mouth. But she thought about what would happen if she did. Her grandfather, Silas Bellamy, was not a man who sat still. Not when someone he loved was hurt. He would want to drive out that same night. He would want to talk to a dean, a coach, someone. And more than that, she'd have to explain everything. Who she was, what she'd learned, what her family carried. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if she could help it. It's good, she said instead. Still settling in. New roommate is nice. Good, Silas said. That matters more than people think. They talked a few more minutes about small things. The weather, her classes, whether she'd found a good running route. Before they hung up, he paused, like he sometimes did. Something was on his mind. You sound a little tired, Nora. Long day, she said. That's all right. He didn't push. He never did. Remember what I always told you? She smiled, even though he couldn't see it. You don't learn to fight to hurt people, she said. You learn so you never have to be afraid of anyone. That's right, he said, satisfaction in his voice. Good night, kiddo. Good night, Grandpa. After the call, Nora sat in the dark for a long time. Her mind drifted back, the way it always did on nights like this. She was 6 years old, standing barefoot on a mat. The mat sat in a garage her grandfather had converted. He'd built it himself, board by board. He built it after her parents died in a car accident. The road had been icy. Nora had been 4. She barely remembered them. What she remembered was Silas, patient and steady. He became the only home she had left. He never rushed her. He never pushed her toward anger. Watch my feet, he'd say, not my fists. The feet tell you everything. He taught her balance before he taught her strikes. He taught her breathing before he taught her blocks. Years passed before he let her throw a single punch at a bag. Anyone can learn to hit something, he told her once. She was maybe 10 at the time. It takes longer to learn when not to. That lesson had stayed with her longer than any technique. Lying in her dorm room now, 14 years later, she understood why. If she had reacted that morning, if she'd shoved Grant, made a scene, thrown a punch, she knew how it would look. On video, angry new girl attacks football star. That story would have followed her all year. Walking away, calm and steady, that story was harder to spin into something ugly. It wasn't weakness. It had never been weakness. It was control. Control, her grandfather always said, was the hardest skill in the world. She closed her eyes and let herself finally feel tired. That Saturday, Callie dragged her off campus for the first time. You need to see the town, Callie said. Not just the library. They walked 10 minutes into downtown Millbrook. They passed a hardware store with a sign untouched for 40 years. They passed a barber shop, 3 old men playing checkers in the window. Callie led her to a small diner on the corner. A bell hung over the door. The booths were vinyl, patched with silver tape. A waitress in her 70s greeted them like old friends. New face, the woman said, smiling at Nora. First time in? First time, Nora said. Well, you sit right there by the window. Best seat in the house. Her name tag read Dottie. She'd worked the diner, she told them proudly, since before either was born. Over milkshakes and grilled cheese, Callie talked about her family. They lived 2 states away. Her mom worked nights at a hospital. Her dad had been gone since Callie was young. That's part of why the scholarship comment got to me, she admitted. It's not charity. It's everything my mom worked for. Nora listened, really listened, the way her grandfather had taught her. You don't owe anyone an explanation for how hard you worked, she said. Callie smiled at that. The tension eased from her shoulders. It was the first time all week. Dottie came by to refill their water and lingered a moment. You girls remind me of my granddaughters, she said. Good to see young people looking out for each other. Not enough of that these days. She patted the table twice and moved on. Nora watched her go. Something warm settled in her chest. It was a small thing, an old woman's kindness in a diner booth, but it stayed with her the rest of the day. Places like this, she thought, were worth protecting too. The days that followed settled into something close to normal. Nora went to classes. She studied at the library, usually near a window over the quad. She and Callie fell into an easy rhythm. They traded turns on coffee runs. They split snacks late at night while studying. Grant Calloway, for his part, seemed to lose interest. Or so it seemed. The video got some attention, then faded the way most things do. A few students still whispered when Nora walked by. Most had moved on to newer gossip. She told herself it was over. She was wrong about that too. though she wouldn't know it for a while. On a Thursday morning 3 weeks into the semester, Nora had her first PE class. It was a general wellness requirement most students put off. The class met in the campus gym, a big open space. The floor was worn wood. Faded blue mats sat stacked against one wall. The instructor, Coach Merritt, was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s. He'd coached track for 20 years. He ran the class like a drill, fast-paced, no wasted time. That day's activity was a basic dodgeball drill. It was meant to build reflexes and teamwork. Simple, low stakes, the kind of thing nobody thought twice about. Nora stood near the back of her group. Her mind was still on an essay due that afternoon. A ball came flying from the other side of the gym. It was thrown harder than the drill called for. It sailed carelessly toward a cluster of students near her. Nora's body moved before her mind caught up. She pivoted on one foot and dropped her shoulder. She let the ball sail past her ear by less than an inch. It wasn't a stumble, it wasn't luck. It was one clean, economical motion. It was the kind that comes from repeating something 10,000 times, until the body stops asking permission. A few students nearby actually gasped. They were more surprised by how smooth it looked than by the near miss. Coach Merritt, standing off to the side, went very still. He'd coached athletes for 2 decades. He knew what raw talent looked like. He knew what trained looked like too. This was the second one. He didn't say anything to Nora directly. He just made a small note in his head. The way coaches do when they see something worth watching. Later that afternoon, he mentioned it to another staff member. It was almost in passing. "There's a transfer student in my morning class," he said, half joking. "Moves like she's had real training somewhere." The other coach shrugged, not thinking much of it. "Probably did gymnastics in high schools or something." Merritt nodded and let it go. It wasn't his business to ask, but he remembered it. People like him always remember things like that. Nora didn't think much of the moment either, not at the time. She'd been dodging things her whole life. It was reflex, nothing more, as far as she was concerned. She had no idea gym class had planted a seed of curiosity, a seed that would matter more than she could guess. Most mornings before her first class, Nora ran along the river path. It was quiet out there. Just the sound of water and her own breathing. She'd started running young, back when her grandfather first took her in. Running helped in those early years. Grief showed up at strange hours and needed somewhere to go. She barely remembered her parents. A soft laugh, maybe. The smell of her mother's coat. Mostly what she remembered was the accident itself, secondhand, pieced together from things adults said when they thought she wasn't listening. An icy road. A truck that couldn't stop in time. A phone call that changed everything for her grandfather, too. Silas had been 63 years old when he became a father again. In every way that mattered. He never once made her feel like a burden. "Grief doesn't go away," he told her once, years later. She was old enough by then and to ask real questions. "You just learn to carry it differently. Training helped me carry mine. I wanted to give you the same tool, in case you ever needed it." She hadn't needed it the way he had. But some mornings, lungs burning and mind finally quiet, she understood him. There was a kind of honesty in that burn. It didn't let her hide from anything, not even from herself. Running wasn't about outrunning anything. It was about learning your own strength, 1 mile at a time. So it would be there, waiting, the day she actually needed it. She had no way of knowing how soon that day was coming. The following week brought a different kind of trouble. Callie had been quieter than usual for a few days. She picked at her food at dinner. She stared at her phone with a tight jaw. Nora finally asked her about it on a Tuesday night. They sat on the floor of their room, laptops open. More talking than studying. "You've been off," Nora said. "What's going on?" Callie hesitated, then sighed, closing her laptop. "It's stupid," she said. "It's just some guys on my floor. And Grant's group." "What are they doing?" Callie shrugged, trying to make it sound smaller than it was. "They keep making comments. About my scholarship. About how I got in on some sob story." Her voice cracked slightly. "Like I don't belong here. Like I didn't earn it." Nora felt a hot flash of anger rise and pass. It was sharp and immediate. She had learned patience her whole life. She had learned restraint. But watching someone hurt a person who couldn't fight back, that was different. Her grandfather had a name for that too. Cowardice with an audience, he called it. 2 days later, Nora saw it happen for herself. She and Callie were walking through the student union, heading to dinner. Grant and Dean spotted them near the entrance. "Hey, scholarship girl," Dean called out, loud enough for half the room. "They still letting charity cases eat with everyone else?" A few people laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Callie's face went red. She kept walking, eyes on the floor. The way people do when they're trying to disappear. Nora stopped walking. She turned, took 2 steps toward Grant and Dean. She stood directly between them and Callie. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "You call that a joke," Nora said, looking Grant square in the eye. "I call it cowardice with an audience." The room went quiet in a particular way. The way rooms go quiet when something real gets said out loud. Grant's jaw tightened. His friends looked at him, waiting. "Careful," he said, trying to sound light. It didn't quite land. "You're new here. You don't know how things work." "I know exactly how things work," Nora said. "People like you need someone smaller to feel big." A few students actually laughed at that, quick and surprised. Someone near the counter clapped once, then stopped, unsure if that was allowed. Grant's face flushed, embarrassment mixing with anger. He looked around at the small crowd that had gathered. He felt the shift in the room. He forced a smirk and shook his head. He walked off with Dean trailing behind him, muttering under his breath. Callie let out a shaky breath once they were gone. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," Nora said, simple. No drama in it at all. They got their food and sat down near the window. Callie was quiet for a while, picking at her fries. "Thank you," she said finally. "Really?" Nora just nodded. "You don't have to thank me for that. Anyone should have done it." "Not everyone would," Callie said. She was right about that. Nora just didn't say so. Word of the exchange spread through the dorms fast. By the next morning, a few more students nodded at Nora in the hallway. Small gestures of respect that hadn't been there before. Grant, for his part, said nothing more that week. But something had shifted behind his eyes. Being embarrassed once he could shake off. Twice, in front of people who mattered to him, that stuck differently. He didn't talk about it much, not even to Dean. But late one night, alone in his dorm room, he scrolled back through the video. He watched it again and again. He didn't understand why it bothered him so much. He told himself it didn't. He told himself a lot of things that week. That same night, his phone rang. His father's name lit up the screen. Preston Calloway didn't call often. When he did, it was rarely just to talk. "I heard there was some kind of scene at the union," Preston said. No greeting first. News traveled fast when you sat on the board of trustees. "It was nothing," Grant said. "Just some girl running her mouth." "Some girl embarrassed you in front of half the student union," Preston said. "That's not nothing. That's a story people tell." Grant didn't answer right away. "Your name means something on that campus," his father continued. "It means something because I made sure of it. Don't let a transfer student turn it into a joke." "I hear you," Grant said, quieter than he meant to sound. "Handle it," Preston said quietly. "I don't want to hear about it again." The call ended before Grant could say anything else. He sat on his bed for a long moment, phone still in his hand. A familiar knot formed low in his stomach. It was the one he'd felt his whole life whenever his father said handle. He told himself this was just how things worked in his family. Winning mattered. Looking strong mattered. He'd never really been taught there was another way to carry himself. He thought back to being 9 years old. He'd stood on a little league field, striking out in the final inning. The game hadn't even mattered much. His father hadn't yelled. Preston Calloway never yelled. He'd just gone quiet the whole ride home. Disappointment sat in the car like a fourth passenger. That silence had taught Grant more than any lecture could. Losing wasn't just losing. Losing was letting your father down. Somewhere along the way, that fear had curdled into something else. A need to always come out on top, no matter who got stepped on along the way. It didn't excuse what he'd done to Nora, or to Callie. Nothing really would. But it explained something, in a small and sad way. How a person could grow up with everything money could buy, and still end up hungry for something he couldn't name. The following Monday, 10 days after the union incident, something happened. Neither Nora nor Callie saw it coming. Students filled the stairwells of the dorm buildings that afternoon. They headed up to rooms or down toward the dining hall. Nora and Callie were on the 3rd floor landing, headed down together. They talked about a group project due later that week. Dean Finch was coming up the same stairwell, moving fast. He was moving fast, the way people move when they don't want to think about what they're about to do. As they passed on the narrow landing, Dean shifted his weight. He shoved his shoulder hard into Nora's side. It was meant to look like an accident, a crowded stairwell, a careless bump. But Callie was standing just below. She stood right in the path of where Nora would fall. For half a second, it looked like both of them would go down together, hard, onto concrete stairs. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Nora's body reacted the way 14 years of training had shaped it. Quiet, precise, automatic. She dropped her center of gravity and twisted her hips. In the same motion, she caught Callie by the arm. She redirected both their weight toward the wall instead of the stairs. Her shoulder hit the railing hard. She grunted, more from impact than pain. Callie stumbled but stayed upright, gripping the railing, eyes wide with shock. Dean nearly fell himself. He'd been thrown off balance by a shove that hadn't landed the way he expected. He caught the railing just in time. For a moment, everyone on the landing just stood there, frozen. Nora straightened up slowly, checking Callie with one glance. "You okay?" Callie nodded, breathless. Yeah, I'm okay. What just happened?" Dean muttered something about a crowded stairwell. He called it an accident and hurried up the stairs without looking back. A student a few steps below had caught part of it on his phone. The footage was shaky, half blocked by other bodies in the frame. It wasn't clear. Not clear enough to prove anything, but it was clear enough to notice one thing. The way Nora had moved, the pivot, the redirect, the way she'd protected 2 people in one smooth motion, without a single wasted step. Their resident advisor showed up 20 minutes later. A worried freshman had seen the whole thing from the landing below. She'd already gone for help. She sat Nora and Callie down in the common room. She asked careful questions and wrote notes on a clipboard. "Do you think it was intentional?" the RA asked. Nora hesitated. She had no proof, just a feeling sharp and certain that Dean's shoulder hadn't found her by accident. "I don't know," she said finally. "It happened fast." Callie wanted to say more. She'd seen Dean's face right before it happened, something calculating in it. But without anything solid to point to, she stayed quiet too. She wasn't sure if speaking up would help, or just paint a target on both their backs. Dean, when questioned separately, stuck to his story without blinking. Crowded stairwell. Bad timing. He even apologized, sounding almost sincere. The RA wrote it up as an accidental collision, nothing more. There wasn't enough to call it anything else. Nora didn't argue. She'd learned that some fights weren't worth having yet. Not until you had something solid enough to stand on. But she noticed it. She filed it away quietly, the way her grandfather had taught her to notice patterns. One shove could be an accident. She had a feeling this wasn't going to be the last one. By that evening, the blurry video made its way into a group chat. Then another. Then another. The caption someone added summed up what half the campus was whispering. "New transfer girl isn't what she looks like." Nora didn't see the video that night. She was too busy checking on Callie, making sure she was really all right. She iced her own shoulder where it had hit the railing. Before bed, she called her grandfather, mostly to hear his voice, though she told herself it was just their usual check-in. "You sound rattled," Silas said, almost before she'd finished saying hello. He'd always been able to hear things in her voice that others missed. "Just a long day," Nora said. "Someone bumped into me on the stairs, no big deal." There was a pause on the line, longer than usual. "Nora, I'm fine, Grandpa." "Really?" He didn't push, though she could tell he wanted to. That was one of the hardest parts of loving someone who trusted you. Sometimes silence felt less like patience, more like a door she was choosing to keep shut. "All right," he finally said. "But you know you can tell me anything, whatever it is." "I know," she said, and meant it, even as she kept the rest of it to herself. They said their goodnights. She sat with the phone in her lap a while after the call ended. She was wrestling with the same question she'd been circling for weeks. At what point did protecting him from worry turn into just protecting a secret? She didn't have an answer yet. She went to bed, still turning the question over. The shoulder she'd bruised on the railing ached quietly under the blanket. She didn't know that somewhere across campus, a man had opened that same video. An older man who worked security. He watched it on his phone, twice, and went very still. Gerald Walsh had worked security at Millbrook for almost 15 years. Before that, he'd spent 2 decades as a police officer. He'd worked in a mid-sized city 3 hours north. He was not an easy man to surprise. He'd seen a lot in his life. But something about that shaky clip made the hair on his arm stand up. He watched it a third time, slower. He paused right as the girl pivoted. He knew that motion. He'd seen it before a long time ago, in a run-down building with a hand-painted sign out front. That night, after his shift ended, Walsh drove home. His small house sat on the edge of town. He didn't turn on the television like he usually did. Instead, he went into the hall closet. He pulled down an old cardboard box from the top shelf. He set it on the kitchen table. Inside were things he hadn't looked at in years. An old badge, retired along with him. A folded newspaper clipping, yellowed at the edges. And near the bottom, a single photograph, its corners soft and worn. He pulled it out and set it under the kitchen light. In the photo, a much younger version of himself stood outside a small building. It had a modest sign. Iron Hold Martial Arts, it read, hand-painted, simple. Beside him stood an older man, maybe 50 at the time. He was dressed in a plain training uniform. His stance was relaxed, but somehow immovable, like a tree that had weathered every storm and was still standing. Walsh remembered him well. He remembered other things too, small details that came back slowly. The chalk dust that always seemed to hang in the air of that room. The way the floorboards creaked in the same two spots, no matter how careful anyone was. The instructor never seemed to mind the creaking. He just kept teaching, patient as ever. 30 years ago, that man had taught a free self-defense class. It was for a group of young police officers, Walsh among them. This was back when budgets were tight. Nobody else had been willing to volunteer their time. He remembered him teaching balance first, breathing first. The same way Walsh realized now, that girl had moved on those stairs. He hadn't thought about that man in years. He sat at his kitchen table a long while, the photograph in his hands. An old memory was slowly waking up. Well, I'll be, he said quietly, to no one but himself. Small world. He didn't know yet what any of this meant. He didn't know the girl's last name. He didn't know if there was really a connection at all. But something told him it mattered. Something told him to keep the photograph close. Instead of putting it back in the box, he thought back to those Tuesday evenings, all those years ago. A dozen young officers, most exhausted from double shifts. They dragged themselves into a small rented space above a hardware store. One instructor had offered his time for free. The man never talked about himself much. He talked about balance, about patience, about the difference between a fighter and someone who simply knew how to survive one. Most of you will never need this, he'd told them that first night. I hope you never do. But if the day comes, I want your body to know what to do, before your fear has a chance to decide for you. Walsh had used those lessons exactly twice in his career. Both times in situations that could have ended far worse without them. He'd tried more than once to track the man down afterward. He wanted to properly thank him. By the time he got around to it, the space sat empty. A new sign was already going up in the window. The instructor had simply moved on the way some people do, choosing quiet over recognition. Walsh had always wondered what happened to him. Now, staring at a blurry video decades later, he wondered. Maybe he might finally find out. He set the photograph against the sugar bowl on his kitchen table. He propped it up where he'd see it first thing in the morning. Some debts, he thought, take their time finding a way to be repaid. Maybe this was his. Back in her dorm room that same night, Nora sat alone. Callie had gone to bed early, still a little shaken from the stairwell, though she'd insisted she was fine before drifting off. Nora sat by the window. The campus was quiet outside, most lights already off across the quad. She held the silver pendant in her palm, turning it slowly. She could feel the worn edges her grandfather had smoothed down himself, over years of touching. She thought about the stairwell, about how close it had been. Not for her. She'd been ready for that, whether she wanted to admit it or not. For Callie, if she hadn't reacted fast enough, if her instincts had been slower, things could have gone differently. Callie could have been badly hurt. The thought weighed on her, impossible to shake. She thought about her grandfather again, the way she often did on nights like this. She was 10 years old in the memory that came to her now. Standing on the same mat, in the same converted garage. Sweat on her forehead, frustration in her small clenched fists. She had just been knocked down for the 5th time in a row. It was a basic sparring drill. She was furious about it. I'll never get this, she'd said, close to tears. Silas had knelt down in front of her, patient as always. "You're not supposed to get it today," he told her. "You're supposed to get up today. That's all. Just get up." She hadn't understood it then, not really. She understood it now. Getting up wasn't about winning a fight. It was about refusing to let a fall define you. She thought about that lesson often these days. It seemed to apply to more than sparring. Falling down was easy. Almost anyone could manage that part. Getting back up with your dignity still intact took something else entirely. She thought about Grant, about Dean, about the whispered rumors already spreading. Some people would call what happened on the stairs an accident. Some people were already calling her something else entirely. Half joking, half serious. She wasn't ready to be that person on campus. The girl with secret skills, the girl people whispered about in hallways. She'd come to Millbrook to study art history. She wanted to make a few friends. She wanted something close to a normal life. But normal, she was starting to realize, might not be entirely up to her anymore. Somewhere across town, in a small kitchen, an old photograph leaned against a coffee mug. A retired officer stared at it long after he should have gone to bed. Somewhere in a dorm room 2 buildings over, a young man lay awake too. He was replaying a cafeteria video in his head, telling himself he didn't care what people thought. He was lying, and some small part of him knew it. Pride has a way of doing that. It convinces people they're right long after the evidence says otherwise. Nora set the pendant down on her nightstand and turned off her lamp. Outside, the campus was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before something changes. She didn't know yet how much was about to shift. She didn't know about the photograph in Gerald Walsh's kitchen. She didn't know about the resentment building quietly behind Grant Calloway's easy smile. She only knew one thing for certain. The same thing her grandfather had taught her since she was small enough to trip over her own training mat. Some people mistake patience for weakness. They rarely make that mistake twice. Somewhere, far from that quiet campus, an older man sat on his porch. It was that same night. His small house had a garage that still smelled faintly of chalk and old wood. He looked up at the stars, thinking of his granddaughter. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, he didn't know what she was facing. He only felt in some quiet corner of his heart that she needed his trust. A little longer, at least. So he did. And 3 states away, Nora finally closed her eyes and slept. She was unaware that the storm building around her had already started to gather. Slow and quiet, the way real storms always do. Before anyone notices, the sky has changed. By the end of that first month, 3 people held a piece of something bigger than themselves. A girl who had learned, since childhood, that real strength rarely raises its voice. A young man who had learned since childhood that losing was never an option, whatever the cost. And an old security guard, sitting alone in his kitchen, slowly remembering a debt he never got the chance to repay. None of them could see the whole picture yet. That would take a little more time and a lot more courage from all 3. But somewhere, 30 years earlier, a man told a room of young officers something Gerald Walsh never forgot. Nora Bellamy had heard the same words 1,000 times, growing up in that same converted garage. Strength isn't about who can win a fight. It's about who's still standing, in body and spirit, once the fighting is over. That lesson was about to be tested in ways none of them could have predicted. And it wouldn't wait much longer. Autumn was settling fully over Millbrook now. The maples on the quad had turned a deep orange. The mornings carried a real chill for the first time all season. Students walked to class with coffee cups warming their hands. They had no idea anything unusual was happening around them at all. For most of campus, Nora Bellamy was still just the quiet transfer student, the one from the art history program, the one with the nice roommate and the odd, calm way about her. Only a handful of people had started to wonder if there was more to her. A coach who trusted his own eyes. A security guard chasing a 30-year-old memory. A roommate who had seen up close exactly what Nora was capable of when someone she loved was in danger. And one young man embarrassed twice in front of people who mattered to him, quietly deciding that next time he wouldn't stop at embarrassment. None of them said a word about it out loud, not yet. That was the strange part about small towns and small campuses too. The biggest changes almost always arrived quietly, dressed up as an ordinary Tuesday. Nobody rings a bell to announce that something has started. It just starts, and the people paying attention feel it first. Whatever came next, it would not stay quiet for long. Some storms announce themselves with thunder. Others just get quiet and colder and closer, until you finally notice the sky has changed. By the middle of October, Nora Bellamy had almost convinced herself the worst was over. The stairwell was 3 weeks behind her. Grant Calloway had kept his distance, at least in public. Millbrook College had settled into an easy rhythm. Midterms, falling leaves, and Friday night football games. Nobody in her dorm seemed to miss. She should have known better. Quiet in her grandfather's world was rarely the end of a fight. It was usually just the space before the next one. Coach Merritt noticed her most mornings on the river path now. He'd started nodding at her, the way you nod at someone you're watching. He never said why. He didn't need to. Some instincts just work that way. Callie noticed something too, though she couldn't quite name it. Nora seemed a little more settled lately, a little more like someone who belonged at Millbrook, instead of someone just passing through. Callie liked to think their friendship had something to do with that. She wasn't entirely wrong. The two of them had built a small, steady routine by then. Tuesday dinners at the dining hall, always the same corner table. Sunday mornings spent studying with too much coffee and not enough sleep. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it felt solid. Solid things Nora was learning mattered more than exciting ones. Her grandfather had told her that once, though she hadn't understood it at the time. Excitement burns out, he'd said. Solid things carry weight. She thought about that phrase more often than she let on. On a Wednesday afternoon, Nora sat in the back row of a lecture hall. It was Professor Whitfield's American History seminar, one of the general education requirements she'd put off until junior year. The class was small, maybe 20 students. They gathered in a hall with tall windows. The radiators clanked more than they heated. Professor Whitfield stood at the front, a stack of index cards in one hand. She rarely looked down at them. That day's lecture covered a topic most students found dry on paper: community programs in the late 20th century, neighborhood watch groups, after-school initiatives, local volunteer efforts that never made national news. But they quietly shaped small towns for decades. "I want to tell you about one program in particular," Whitfield said. She set her index cards down entirely. "Because I think it says something about how change actually happens here. Not through headlines, through people." Nora sat up a little straighter. She couldn't have said exactly why. "In the early years of my career, I researched a string of programs," Whitfield continued. "They popped up across small towns in this region. Most of them started the same way. A local police department, underfunded and overwhelmed, needed help. Instead of waiting on the state, ordinary citizens stepped up." She walked to the side of the room, near an old projector screen. "One program stood out to me more than the others," she said. "It ran out of a small rented space above a hardware store. No funding, no advertising. Just one instructor who volunteered his evenings for years. He trained police officers and civilians alike free of charge. A few students glanced at their phones, unbothered. They were waiting for the lecture to move to something they'd actually be tested on. Nora was not one of them. Her pulse had picked up, though her face stayed carefully still. It was a skill she'd practiced her whole life without ever calling it a skill. "I tried to track him down years later for a follow-up piece," Whitfield said. "By then, he'd closed the program and moved out of the area. Quiet man, never wanted credit. From what I understand, several of the officers he trained went on to save lives. More than once." She paused, scanning the room. Her eyes landed briefly, almost accidentally, on Nora. His name was Silas Bellamy. The room didn't react. Why would it? It was just a name, one of hundreds mentioned that semester. A student near the front raised a hand. "Did the program ever get any official recognition? Awards, grants, anything like that?" Whitfield shook her head. "Not that I could ever find. When I asked him directly, he told me something I've never forgotten. He said recognition wasn't the point. He said the point was making sure people could walk through the world without fear." Another student, half joking, called out from the back, "Sounds like a superhero origin story." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Whitfield smiled, but there was something serious underneath it. In a way, maybe it was. Real courage rarely looks like the movies. Most of the time it looks like showing up, week after week, for free. But Nora felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. Her grandfather had never once told her his program had a name people remembered. He'd never told her a professor 3 states away had tried to track him down. He had simply raised her quietly, the way he did everything. He let the value of what he taught speak for itself. Class ended a few minutes later. Students filed out, already talking about lunch, about the game that weekend. Nora lingered, gathering her things slowly, until the room had mostly cleared. Professor Whitfield glanced up from her desk, unsurprised to see her still there. "Bellamy," she said, testing the word gently. She set it down carefully, instead of dropping it. "That's an unusual last name to share with someone from my research." Nora hesitated only a second. "He's my grandfather." Whitfield's expression softened. Something like quiet respect settled over her face. "I thought it might be," she said. "You have a similar way of standing still when you're thinking. It's rare in students your age." "Please," Nora said, more urgency in her voice than she meant to show. "I'd rather people not know." "Not yet." Whitfield studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That's not my story to tell," she said. "But Nora, I'll say this much. Whatever brought your grandfather to fold himself into a quiet life, I always suspected something. Men like that usually step back because they've already given everything they had to give." The words settled into Nora's chest, heavier than she expected. She thanked the professor and left, walking across the quad in the cold afternoon light. She kept turning the conversation over in her mind. The wind had picked up since class started. It sent a scatter of orange leaves across the brick path in front of her. She pulled her jacket tighter and kept walking. Her mind kept circling back to the name Whitfield had spoken so casually. Her grandfather had never once told her his program had a name people still remembered. He'd never told her a professor had once tried to track him down. He had simply raised her, quietly, letting the value of his teaching speak for itself. She wondered how many quiet histories were folded into the people around her, waiting for the right person to finally notice. She hadn't told anyone. Whitfield had promised to keep it quiet, but secrets in a town the size of Millbrook rarely stayed contained for long, no matter how carefully people meant to guard them. Gerald Walsh heard a version of it 2 days later, secondhand. That was how most things reached him now. He spent his shifts mostly alone in a small security office near the gym. A student worker mentioned it in passing. Something about a history professor talking about an old self-defense instructor. The same last name as the transfer student everyone had been buzzing about. Walsh didn't say anything at the time. He just filed it away, the same careful way he'd filed away evidence for 20 years. That evening, he called an old friend from his academy days, a retired detective named Roy Osgood. He still kept in touch with a few contacts at the state records office. "Roy, it's Gerald. Got a strange favor to ask." "Long time," Roy said. "What kind of favor?" "You remember that self-defense program, back before either of us made detective? Ran out of that space above the hardware store on 5th. "Bellamy's place," Roy said without hesitation. "Sure, I remember. Best training I ever had, and it cost me nothing but a Tuesday evening." "You still keep in shape?" Walsh asked, half joking. Roy laughed. "Slower than I used to. But the balance stuck. Funny how that works. You forget the exact moves, but the balance stays. Like it wired itself into you permanently." "That's exactly what I remember thinking, watching him teach," Walsh said. "Like he wasn't just showing us technique. He was rewiring something deeper." Something eased in Walsh's chest, hearing another voice confirm the memory. "You ever hear what happened to him? Where he ended up?" "Not really. Heard he moved a few hours south. Raised a granddaughter after some kind of family tragedy. Kept mostly to himself after that." "Why the sudden interest after all these years?" Walsh looked at the photograph still propped against his sugar bowl. "Might be nothing," he said. "Just a feeling I can't quite shake." "Those feelings are usually worth paying attention to," Roy said. "Especially at our age." Walsh thanked him and hung up. He sat for a long while in the quiet of his kitchen. He wasn't ready to approach Nora directly, not yet. He had no real proof of anything, just an old photograph and a gut feeling that refused to let go. But he started paying closer attention after that. He watched the way she carried herself across campus. He noticed the small habits, the ones that separated people who'd taken a class from people who'd lived inside discipline. He was patient. He'd learned patience a long time ago, in that same rented room above a hardware store. He had a feeling that patience was about to matter more than he realized. That same week, word started moving through campus, the way rumors always do, sideways, half-formed, picking up details that weren't quite true. Somebody had overheard part of the lecture. Somebody else connected it to the stairwell video that had never fully gone away. By Friday, a version of the story had reached Grant Calloway. Dean Finch delivered it secondhand over lunch in the dining hall. Apparently, her grandfather used to run some kind of self-defense thing, Dean said. He kept his voice low, only for their table. Old guy trained cops for free back in the day. Grant set his fork down slowly. So what? He said. Some old man taught karate 30 years ago. Doesn't mean she's some kind of secret agent. But even as he said it, something cold moved through his chest. He thought of the stairwell, the dodgeball drill everyone still talked about. He thought of the way Nora had looked at him that first morning. Calm, unbothered, like his best attempt to humiliate her hadn't even registered. He'd told himself for weeks now that he'd let it go. He hadn't. Not really. Pride has a strange way of keeping score. Long after the scoreboard's been put away. That weekend, Grant drove home, an hour outside Millbrook. His father's annual fall gathering waited there, a small dinner party for a handful of board members and university donors. His father found him afterward out on the back porch, both of them alone with the evening quiet. "You look distracted," Preston Calloway said, pouring himself a drink. "It's nothing, Grant." His father's voice had a way of ending conversations before they properly started. Grant sighed, giving in. "There's this transfer student. Word is her grandfather ran some kind of academy. People are starting to talk about her like she's untouchable." Preston's expression didn't change much, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "Untouchable," he repeated, almost amused. "Nobody at that school is untouchable. Not while my name is on their new dormitory. It's not about the money, Dad." "Everything is about the money, son. You'll understand that eventually." Preston set his glass down, turning to face him fully. "Founders' Day is in 3 weeks," he said. "I'm announcing the dormitory funding that night, in front of the entire board and half the alumni association, and every reporter within 50 miles. I will not have some transfer student's internet moment overshadow that. So what do you want me to do?" Preston's answer came quiet, almost casual, the way truly dangerous instructions often do. "I want this handled before Founders' Day. Quietly, permanently if it comes to that. I trust you can figure out the details. That's what I pay your tuition for, isn't it? To teach you how to solve problems." Grant didn't answer right away. Some small part of him recognized how wrong this felt. It was buried under years of similar conversations. That part had never once been loud enough to matter. "I'll take care of it," he said instead. His father nodded once, satisfied, and went back inside to rejoin his guests. Grant stayed on the porch a while longer. He stared out at the dark yard. He told himself this was just how his family solved problems. He didn't yet know how far that solving would go. Back on campus that Sunday night, Grant found Dean Finch in his dorm room. Dean had his feet up on the desk, halfway through a video game. "I need your help with something," Grant said, closing the door behind him. "And I need you to not ask a lot of questions about it." Dean paused the game, sensing the shift in his friend's voice. "That bad?" "Huh. My father wants the Bellamy situation handled before Founders' Day." "Handled how?" Grant hesitated, the plan still forming even as he said it out loud. "You've got that friend on the debate team, the one with office access." "Marcus," Dean said slowly. "Yeah. What about him? Professors leave stuff lying around in those shared offices all the time. Answer keys, exam drafts. If something like that turns up somewhere it shouldn't, somewhere obvious enough for a routine check to find." Dean sat up straighter, understanding dawning on his face. "You want to get her kicked out for cheating?" "I want this to be over," Grant said, sharper than he meant to. "I want people to stop looking at me like I'm the villain. Like I'm the villain of some viral video." Dean studied him for a moment. "You do know she probably never actually cheated on anything in her life, right?" "Girl seems like a straight arrow." Something flickered across Grant's face, quick and uncomfortable, gone before it could take hold. "That's not really the point anymore." "All right," Dean said finally, standing up. "I'll talk to Marcus. But if this blows up, you're covering for both of us." "It won't blow up," Grant said, with more confidence than he actually felt. "Nobody's going to trace it back to us. It just needs to look convincing enough for the routine sweep next week." Dean nodded slowly and reached for his phone to text Marcus. Grant left a few minutes later, walking back to his own room. The cold night air didn't do much to clear his head. That same uneasy knot sat low in his stomach. It had been there since the porch conversation with his father. He told himself, one more time, that this was necessary, that his father expected results, not excuses. He didn't let himself think too hard about what that meant for someone else's life. By the following week, Nora had an afternoon class in the humanities building. A mandatory academic integrity workshop was scheduled that day. It was for freshmen and transfer students. It was routine. Every student new to Millbrook sat through it once. A rundown of plagiarism policy, citation rules, and the honor code students signed at orientation. Nora barely paid attention. She had never cheated on anything in her life. Her grandfather had drilled honesty into her as thoroughly as any physical technique. A person who cuts corners in small things, he'd told her once, eventually cuts corners in things that matter. She left the workshop that afternoon and went straight to the library. She worked late on a paper due at the end of the week. She didn't notice because there was no reason to. Her backpack had been left unattended. Nearly 20 minutes, hanging on a hook outside the locker room during her wellness class. Dean Finch had noticed. He'd been waiting for exactly that kind of opportunity for almost a week. It hadn't taken much. A few seconds, a glance over each shoulder. Nobody thought twice about a student pausing near an unattended backpack. Campuses ran on that kind of quiet, everyday trust. Dean had counted on it, and it had worked exactly as planned. Inside a manila folder, slipped between two of her textbooks, sat a printed answer key. It was for her upcoming art history midterm. Stolen days earlier from an unlocked filing cabinet in a teaching assistant's shared office. A cabinet Grant had access to, through a friend on the debate team who kept careless hours. Nobody would ever prove exactly who put it there. That was the point. A frame built well enough leaves no fingerprints behind. Only consequences, landing on the wrong person entirely. On Thursday morning, a campus-wide academic integrity sweep flagged 3 backpacks for random inspection. It happened during a routine library check, prompted by an anonymous tip. Nora's was one of them. She stood in stunned silence. A conduct officer pulled the folder from between her textbooks. The printed answer key inside caught the fluorescent light. "This isn't mine," she said, her voice steady even as her stomach dropped. "I've never even seen that before." "We'll need you to come with us," the officer said, not unkindly, but firmly. "This needs to go through proper channels." Nora walked between 2 staff members across the quad. The late morning sun felt strangely bright for a moment so dark. Students stopped to watch, phones already coming out again, the same way they had that first morning in the dining hall. She kept her eyes forward, her spine straight. The same way she had walked out of that cafeteria weeks earlier. It was harder this time. Much harder. But some habits, once built deeply enough, hold even when the ground is shaking. Word moved through campus faster than any lecture ever could. By lunchtime, Callie had already heard 3 different versions of the story. Each one worse than the last, the way rumors always seem to grow legs. One version claimed Nora had been caught with an entire semester's worth of stolen exams. None of it was true. That never seemed to slow a rumor down. By that afternoon, Nora sat across a wide desk from Eleanor Cassidy. She was the director of student conduct, a stern but generally fair woman. She had handled hundreds of cases over 15 years at Millbrook. "I understand this looks bad," Nora said, "but I promise you, I've never seen that folder before today." Director Cassidy studied the printed pages, then looked back at Nora. Something almost sympathetic crossed her expression. "I believe these things are rarely as simple as they look," she said carefully. "Ordinarily, we'd conduct a full investigation before any action is taken. Statements from professors. A review of your academic record. It would typically take 2 to 3 weeks. "Then let's do that," Nora said. "I have nothing to hide." Cassidy hesitated, glancing at a note on her desk. It had come down that morning from someone considerably higher up the chain. "Under normal circumstances, I would agree completely," she said. "However, I've received direction from a member of the Board of Trustees. They're requesting an expedited process given the sensitivity around Founders Day. A board member is involved in my case?" "I'm not able to discuss the specifics," Cassidy said. For a moment, something like discomfort flickered across her face, quickly smoothed away. "What I can tell you is that you'll be placed on interim suspension, pending a formal hearing. That hearing is scheduled for Friday in 2 weeks' time." 2 weeks from now," Nora repeated. "That's Founders Day." "Yes," Cassidy said. The board requested it align with that date. I understand the timing is unfortunate. Nora sat very still, the way she always did when her mind raced. Unfortunate wasn't the word for it. It felt deliberate, precise. The kind of timing that only made sense if someone wanted her case decided quickly, quietly, and buried under the noise of a much bigger celebration. "Am I allowed to stay on campus?" she asked. "You're permitted to remain in your dormitory," Cassidy said. "However, you'll be barred from attending classes and using most academic facilities. That's until the hearing concludes." Nora nodded slowly, absorbing it. "Is there anything else I should know?" Cassidy hesitated again, longer this time. "Off the record," she said quietly, "I'd encourage you to gather any evidence you can. Witnesses, timelines, anything at all. I'll do what I can to make sure it's heard fairly. But I won't pretend the deck isn't a bit stacked, given who's asking for speed." It was as close to a warning as someone in her position could safely give. "Can I ask you something?" Nora said before she could stop herself. "Does this happen often? Cases getting fast-tracked like this?" Cassidy was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "In 15 years, I've seen it happen exactly twice before," she said. "Both times, it involved families with a great deal invested in this institution. I'm not saying that to frighten you. I'm saying it so you understand you're not imagining the shape of this. Thank you for being honest with me." "It's the least I can do," Cassidy said. "I became an educator to help students, not to protect the comfort of whoever happens to be writing the biggest checks. Some days that's easier to remember than others." Nora thanked her and left the office. She walked back across campus in a daze. The golden afternoon light suddenly felt very far away from the churn in her stomach. Callie was waiting outside their dorm building. She'd heard the news from 3 different people before Nora even made it back. "This is insane," Callie said, pulling her into a hug the moment she was close. "Everyone knows you'd never cheat. This has to be some kind of mistake." "It's not a mistake," Nora said quietly. "Someone did this on purpose." She didn't have proof yet, but she had a very strong idea of where to start looking. That night, she packed a small bag to send home. Nora sat on the edge of her bed. She stared at nothing in particular. She thought about calling her grandfather. She thought about it for a long time. But some old habit kept her hand off the phone a little longer, a deeply worn groove of protecting him from worry. She told herself she needed evidence first, a plan first, something solid to bring him, instead of just fear. She didn't yet understand how much that instinct was about to cost her, the same instinct that had once served her so well. 2 days after her suspension began, Nora made her way to Professor Whitfield's office. It was one of the few places on campus not officially barred to her. Whitfield looked up from a stack of ungraded papers. Her expression shifted to concern the moment she saw Nora's face. "I heard," she said simply, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Sit. Tell me what actually happened, not the version circulating the dining hall." Nora explained everything. The folder in her backpack, the rushed hearing date, the pressure from a board member she still hadn't fully identified. Whitfield listened without interrupting. Her jaw tightened slightly as the story went on. "Founders Day," she said, once Nora finished. "That timing is not a coincidence. I've sat through enough faculty meetings to know exactly whose priorities get protected. Do you know who's behind it?" "The board member Director Cassidy mentioned." Whitfield hesitated, weighing how much to say. "I can't confirm anything officially, but there's exactly one family with enough influence to fast-track a hearing, and enough motivation to want a video buried before their name goes on a building." Nora felt something settle into place, cold and certain. "Calloway." Whitfield didn't answer directly, which was, in its own way, an answer. "I can't testify to intentions I can't prove," she said instead. "But I can write you a character statement for the hearing. And I know several colleagues who would do the same quietly if you asked." "Thank you," Nora said, throat tight. "I don't know what to do about the rest of it. My best witnesses are too scared to talk." Whitfield reached across the desk and set her hand briefly over Nora's. "Your grandfather built an entire program on one idea," she said. "That quiet people working together could outlast loud people working alone. I don't know everything he taught you, but I imagine patience was somewhere near the top of the list." Nora managed a small, tired smile. It was the first lesson, before anything else. "Then trust it a little longer," Whitfield said. "Sometimes the truth needs more time to catch up than we'd like." That doesn't mean it isn't coming. Nora left the office with something she hadn't expected to find that day. Not proof exactly, but the sense that she wasn't quite as alone. Not as alone as the empty hallways had made her feel. The days that followed were some of the loneliest of Nora's life. She wasn't allowed in the library. Wasn't allowed in most buildings at all, except her dorm and the dining hall. Even there, people watched her differently now, whispering behind cupped hands. Some students avoided her outright, as though academic dishonesty might be contagious. Others gave her tight, uncomfortable smiles, unsure what to say. A few quietly told her they believed her. It wasn't nearly enough to fill the silence around everything else. She spent most of her days in the dorm room, working on an old laptop. She tried to piece together anything that might help her case. She thought about the blurry stairwell video, still floating somewhere in old group chats. She thought about the freshman who had originally filmed it, a nervous kid named Owen who lived 2 floors up. She found him on a Tuesday afternoon, catching him alone near the mailroom. "I still have the original file," Owen told her, glancing around nervously. "It's not great quality, but you can kind of see what happened. Would you be willing to give a statement?" Nora asked. "For my hearing?" Owen hesitated, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I want to," he said. "I really do. It's just, my financial aid renewal is coming up. Someone mentioned to my advisor that my scholarship paperwork had issues that needed looking into, right after that video started going around." Nora felt her stomach twist. The message wasn't subtle, even delivered secondhand. "I'm sorry," Owen said, looking genuinely miserable about it. "I'm not trying to be a coward. I just can't risk losing my spot here. My family can't afford it otherwise." "I understand," Nora said, and she meant it, even as something in her ached at one more door quietly closing. "There's one more thing," Owen added, lowering his voice further. "The message about my aid, it didn't come through official channels. My advisor said it came from a call made directly to the financial aid office. Someone with enough weight to get a call like that returned same day." "Do you know who called?" "No name," Owen said. "Just someone identifying themselves as being with the board of trustees. That's all my advisor would say." Nora filed that detail away carefully, another small piece of a much larger picture, starting to take shape. She didn't blame him. She recognized the shape of that fear too well. It was the exact same fear someone had used against Callie months earlier, dressed up as a joke about scholarships in a crowded student union. Now it seemed the same tactic was being used again, more carefully this time, aimed at anyone who might have stood up for her. That evening, Callie came back from her part-time shift at the bookstore. She was visibly shaken. "My supervisor pulled me aside today," she said, sitting down heavily on her bed. "Said there'd been some concerns raised about my work-study eligibility. Out of nowhere, I've never had a single complaint in 2 years." Nora already knew, before Callie finished the sentence, exactly what was happening. "They're threatening your financial aid," she said quietly, "to keep you from testifying for me." Callie's face went pale. "Nobody said that directly, but yeah, I think that's exactly what's happening." The two of them sat in silence for a long moment. The weight of it settled over the small room. "You don't have to say anything at the hearing," Nora said finally. "I won't let you risk your education for me." "That's not fair to you," Callie said, tears gathering in her eyes. "You saved me on those stairs. If I don't say something, and this ruins everything for you." "It won't be your fault," Nora said, firm despite the exhaustion in her voice. "It'll be theirs. Whoever's doing this, don't carry guilt for something you didn't cause." Callie nodded, though the guilt sat heavy on her face anyway. The kind that doesn't listen to logic even when it agrees with it. "Can I ask you something?" Callie said after a while, her voice smaller than usual, back on the stairs. "You didn't even hesitate. How did you know exactly what to do that fast?" Nora considered the question for a long moment. "My grandfather used to say the body remembers. It remembers what the mind doesn't have time to decide. I didn't think about it. I just moved. That must have taken years to build. 14 of them," Nora said, "since I was 6. Callie looked at her with something like wonder mixed with sadness. "And now none of that matters because someone slipped a folder into your backpack." "It matters," Nora said quietly. "Just not in the way anyone can put on a hearing transcript." They sat with that for a while, the room quiet around them. "I keep thinking about something my grandfather told me once," Nora said eventually. He said a person's real character shows up loudest in moments nobody's grading them for. Nobody was grading me on those stairs. I didn't have time to perform for anyone. That's how I know it was real. Callie considered that. So the hearing won't actually prove anything true about you. It'll just decide whether other people get to see what's already true. Something like that, Nora said, managing a small smile. My grandfather would probably say it better. I'd like to meet him someday, Callie said. He sounds like he raised someone pretty remarkable. He'd say I did most of the work myself, Nora said. He's stubborn that way. Won't take credit for anything. By the following week, Nora understood the shape of the trap more clearly than ever. The stolen answer key, damning on its own, could be explained away, not without a strong counter-narrative. The blurry stairwell video was her clearest evidence about who she really was. It sat locked away, a phone belonging to a student too frightened to come forward. Her closest witness to character knew exactly what she'd sacrificed to protect someone else. He was being quietly threatened into silence, and the entire process had been fast-tracked, deliberately, timed to land on a night when the school's attention would be elsewhere entirely. She sat by her dorm window on a cold Thursday evening. It was exactly 1 week before her hearing. She watched students cross the quad below, laughing, carefree, unaware of any of it. For the first time since she'd arrived at Millbrook, Nora Bellamy felt truly alone. Not because nobody cared. Callie cared. Owen, in his own frightened way, cared. Even Director Cassidy, bound by rules she couldn't fully bend, seemed to care. She felt alone because patience and restraint didn't seem to be enough anymore. Those were the two things her grandfather had spent 14 years teaching her to trust. She thought of every lesson from that converted garage. Balance before strikes. Breathing before blocks. Never react out of anger. None of those lessons prepared her for an opponent who wouldn't fight in the open, who used institutions and paperwork and quiet threats instead of fists. Her grandfather had taught her how to survive a fight she could see coming. He had never taught her what to do when the fight wore a suit and hid behind a title. That night, long after Callie had fallen asleep, Nora finally picked up her phone. She stared at her grandfather's contact photo for a long moment. An old picture of him laughing at something off camera, taken the summer before she left for college. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She thought about everything she'd told herself these past weeks, that she needed proof first, that she didn't want to worry him, that this was her fight to handle on her own, the way he'd raised her to handle things. But sitting there, staring at that hearing date, she understood something clearly. It suddenly felt like a sentence already decided. There was a difference between handling your own problems and refusing help you actually needed. Her grandfather had never once taught her that asking for help was weakness. She had somehow taught herself that lesson anyway. Quietly, over years of trying not to be a burden. To the one person who had never once treated her like one. She pressed the call button. He answered on the first ring this time, as though some part of him had been waiting. Nora? His voice was instantly alert. It's late, what's wrong? And for the first time in weeks, Nora let herself say it all. The cafeteria, the stairwell, the stolen answer key. The threats aimed at Callie and Owen. The hearing scheduled for the same night as some gala she barely understood. Everything, all of it, spilling out faster than she could organize. By the time she finished, her voice was shaking. Tears finally fell after weeks of holding them back. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Silas finally spoke, his voice carried something Nora had rarely heard. Quiet and absolutely certain. You should have called me the first week, he said gently. Not because you couldn't handle it. Because you never should have had to handle something like this alone. I didn't want you to worry. Nora, his voice softened further. Worrying about you is not a burden. It's the whole reason I get up every morning. It has been since you were 4 years old. She wiped her eyes. Some of the tension in her shoulders finally eased for the first time in days. What do I do? She asked. The hearing is in a week. I don't have enough evidence. People are too scared to help me. You don't have to have all the answers tonight, Silas said. Tonight, you just needed to stop carrying this by yourself. That part's done now. What about the hearing? There was a pause. When he spoke again, she could hear something steady settling into his voice. The sound of a man who had faced difficult things before. I'll be there, he said simply. Friday. Whatever this is, whoever's behind it, you won't be walking into that room alone. Grandpa, you don't have to. Nora. He cut her off, gentle but immovable. There are exactly two things in this world I've never once regretted showing up for. Your school plays. And now, apparently, this. I'll be there. She let out a small, watery laugh, the first real laugh she'd had in what felt like weeks. They talked a while longer. They worked through what evidence she still had, what questions she should expect. Small practical things that helped steady her mind even as the bigger fear remained. Before they hung up, Silas said one more thing, quiet and certain. The kind of thing he only said when he meant it completely. You've spent your whole life learning how not to be afraid of people, he said. People who try to make themselves feel bigger by making others feel small. Whatever happens Friday, remember that. You already know how this story ends. They're the only ones who don't. After the call, Nora sat by the window a long while. The campus was dark and quiet below her. 1 week stood between her and a hearing that suddenly felt a little less impossible. She still didn't know what would happen on Friday. She still didn't know how deep the trap around her really went, or how far Preston Calloway was willing to push to protect his family's name. But since the stolen answer key had turned up, she didn't feel alone, not anymore, facing it. Somewhere 3 hours away, an old man pulled a duffel bag from a closet shelf. He was preparing for a drive he should have made already, the moment his granddaughter's voice had sounded even slightly unlike herself. He didn't know the full shape of what waited for them in Millbrook. He only knew one thing. The same thing he'd known since a girl of 4 fell asleep in his arms, grieving a life she barely remembered. Some fights, you don't walk into swinging. You walk in standing beside the person who needs you, and let that be enough of a statement on its own. Friday was coming, and for the first time in weeks it felt different. It felt like something she was finally ready to face. 3 hours away, in a quieter town, Silas Bellamy moved through his small kitchen. He carried the same unhurried focus he brought to everything. He packed a single duffel bag with a few days' worth of clothes. He paused at the hallway mirror, an old habit from years of teaching. He checked his posture, the same way he'd once checked 100 students lined up before a drill. His reflection looked back at him, older than he sometimes remembered. The lines around his eyes were deeper than the last time Nora had visited. He thought of her at 4 years old, small and silent, sitting in the back seat of his truck outside a courthouse, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had survived the accident when almost nothing else had. He thought of her at 10, furious and crying on a training mat, refusing to quit even when quitting would have been easier. He thought of her at 18, standing in his driveway the morning she left, insisting she didn't need him to drive her the whole way, that she could handle the trip on her own. She had always tried to handle things on her own. He'd raised her to be capable, and capable people sometimes forgot that needing help wasn't the opposite of strength. He picked up the phone and called an old friend, a name he hadn't dialed in several years. Gerald Walsh had been on his mind more than once that week, without any explanation Silas could point to. Something in him told him it wasn't a coincidence. An old instinct, sharpened by decades of paying attention to people. His granddaughter had ended up near an old colleague of his, one who had made a career change years ago. He didn't call Walsh that night. He didn't have a number anymore, hadn't spoken to him in years. But he made a note to ask around once he arrived in Millbrook. An old habit of a man who had learned something long ago. Unexpected connections were rarely as random as they first appeared. He zipped the duffel bag closed and set it by the front door, ready for the drive ahead. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the trees. It carried the particular chill that meant winter wasn't far behind. Silas stood on his porch a while, looking up at the stars. He often did this before a long day, letting the quiet settle into him. Quiet, for a while at least, would not be an option once Friday arrived. He thought of something he used to tell his students, back in that rented room above the hardware store. On nights when someone doubted whether the discipline was really worth the effort. You don't train for the easy days, he used to say. You train so that on the hard day, part of you knows how to stand. He believed that as much now as he ever had. Whatever waited for them in Millbrook, he was ready. Whatever shape the Calloway family's influence had taken, whatever fear had kept good people quiet these past 2 weeks, he intended to walk into that hearing room standing tall, the way 30 years of discipline had taught him to stand, beside the people he loved. Steady,
unshakable.
And if it came to it, ready to let his history speak for itself. Friday would decide a great deal. But some things he knew had already been decided long ago. Friday arrived the way most important days do. Quietly at first with an ordinary sunrise. It gave no hint of what was coming. Nora woke before her alarm. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment before she remembered the day. Callie was already awake across the room. She sat cross-legged on her bed, watching her carefully. "How are you feeling?" Callie asked. "Honestly? I don't know," Nora said. "Scared. Ready. Both at once somehow. Your grandfather's really coming? He texted an hour ago. He's already on the road." Callie managed a small smile. "I still can't believe I'm about to meet the guy who trained you, the one who taught you to save my life on a staircase." "He's not what you're expecting," Nora said. "No cape. No dramatic music. Just an old man who's very good at showing up." They got dressed slowly. Neither of them was in much hurry to walk into a day like this. Nora put on the same simple outfit she'd planned for weeks. Something plain and steady, nothing that shouted for attention. Around her neck, the silver pendant hung on its knotted chain. It was worn smooth from years of touching. A little rougher now, where the knot sat against her collarbone. She held it for a moment before tucking it under her shirt. Whatever happened today, she wanted it close. Callie watched her get ready, hovering near the door with her jacket already on. "Do you want me to come with you? To meet him, I mean." "I do," Nora said. "But not yet. Give us a minute first. He's been driving 3 hours. I think he needs to see my face before anything else." Callie nodded, understanding. "I'll be right outside when you're ready." "Thank you," Nora said. "For all of this. Not just today. For not treating me differently once the rumors started." "You never gave anyone a reason to," Callie said simply. "That was never really in question, not for me." Nora managed a small smile, the first easy one she'd felt in days. Silas Bellamy arrived on campus just after 10 that morning. He parked his old truck in a visitor spot near the administration building. He found Nora waiting on a bench outside. For a moment, neither of them said anything at all. He just opened his arms, and she walked straight into them. The way she had as a little girl, all those years ago, on a day that had also started ordinary and ended up changing everything. "There she is," he said quietly, into her hair. "I've got you now." "I missed you," Nora said, her voice muffled against his jacket. "I know, kiddo, I know." He held her a moment longer, then stepped back. He studied her face the way he always did. He was checking for things words wouldn't tell him. "You look tired," he said. "But you're still standing tall. That's the part that matters." "I didn't sleep much," Nora admitted. "Kept running through everything I might say in there. None of it sounded right." "It doesn't need to sound right," Silas said. "It just needs to be true. Truth has a way of sounding right on its own eventually." He set her bag down on the bench and sat beside her. The old wood creaked slightly under both their weight. "I should have called you the first day," Nora said. "Not just the first week. The very first day in the cafeteria." "Maybe," Silas said. "Or maybe you needed to learn something on your own first, before you were ready to let someone else carry part of it. Either way, you're not carrying it alone anymore. That's what matters now." She leaned her head against his shoulder. She watched students cross the quad in the crisp autumn air. "The hearing's at 2, Nora said. "I still don't know what I'm walking into." "Then let's find out together," Silas said. "But first, there's someone I think we need to talk to." Nora frowned. "Who?" "An old friend of mine," Silas said. "I called around this morning, made a few guesses. Turns out one of them was right. He works security here. Has for years, apparently." Nora's breath caught. "There's a guard who works near the gym. Older man. Everyone likes him." "That would be him," Silas said. Something warm crosses his face. "Small world gets smaller every year I'm alive." They found Gerald Walsh exactly where Nora expected. He stood near the gymnasium entrance, watching students pass with quiet attentiveness. When he saw Silas walking toward him, something shifted in his expression. Recognition broke slowly across 30 years of distance. "I'll be damned," Walsh said, a grin spreading across his weathered face. "Silas Bellamy, in the flesh." "Gerald?" Silas extended a hand, then pulled the old officer into a brief embrace. "You look good. Retirement agrees with you." "Semi-retirement," Walsh said. "Turns out I don't know how to sit still." He glanced at Nora, understanding dawning fully now. "And this must be the granddaughter. Should have put it together weeks ago. You've got his footwork." Nora managed a small laugh, despite everything. "People keep telling me that." Walsh shook his head. still smiling, though something more serious moved behind his eyes. 30 years, he said. I've thought about that little room more times than I could count. Never expected to end up standing this close to it again. Neither did I, Silas admitted. Truth is, I stopped teaching not long after you and your class moved on. Wasn't the same after that. Raising Nora took most of what I had left. How is that going? Walsh asked, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Raising a Bellamy. Ask me again once she graduates, Silas said. Nora laughed, despite the exhaustion she'd been carrying all morning. Walsh's expression turned serious. I've been watching this whole mess unfold from a distance, he said. Wanted to say something sooner. Didn't have enough to go on. Wasn't sure it was my place. What do you have now? Silas asked. Walsh pulled out his phone, scrolling to a video file. A friend of mine still has contacts at the state records office. Between that and some digging of my own, I've got documentation of your old program. News clippings. A roster of officers you trained. Several of them are still on the force 2 counties over. He looked at Nora. I've also been keeping an eye on that stairwell video everyone's been talking about. Got a tech student to clean up the original file this week. Wasn't sure if I'd ever need it. Guess today's the day. Nora felt something loosen for the first time in what felt like weeks. That could help. If Owen's actually willing to bring it forward. Leave that part to me, Walsh said. I think a scared freshman might find a little more courage today. Sometimes people just need to see someone else go first. The 3 of them stood together for a moment outside the gym, an unlikely trio, drawn together by 3 decades of history. There's something else, Walsh said, hesitating slightly. I made a call this morning, too, to a contact who still works in financial aid. I wanted to understand something, how 2 students ended up with sudden concerns about their funding, right when they had information that could help you. And? Nora asked. Both calls came from the same office extension, Walsh said. Belongs to a member of the Board of Trustees, Preston Calloway. Silence settled over the 3 of them. That's not just unethical, Silas said slowly. That's the kind of thing that ends careers, if it's documented properly. I've got the call logs, Walsh said. Financial aid keeps records of every inquiry, even ones made off the books. My contact was happy to pull them, once I explained what was at stake. Nora looked between the 2 men, something steadying inside her that had been missing for 2 long weeks. The hearing's at 2, she said, in the same building as tonight's gala. I don't know exactly how this is supposed to go, but I think we might actually have a chance now. A chance is all your grandfather ever needed, Walsh said, clapping Silas on the shoulder. The rest, he usually figured out along the way. Silas allowed himself a small, tired smile. Let's go find out what 2 weeks of quiet has been hiding. The hearing room sat on the 2nd floor of the administration building. It was a formal space with dark wood paneling and a long table. That was where the disciplinary committee would sit. Director Cassidy presided, flanked by 2 faculty representatives and 1 student representative. They reviewed folders as Nora entered with her grandfather and Gerald Walsh close behind. Grant Calloway sat near the back with his father. He was dressed in a suit that made him look older than 20. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed somewhere on the middle distance. Preston Calloway sat beside him, calm and composed. He looked like a man who expected this to go his way. He'd worn the same expression at board meetings for 15 years. It rarely failed him. He had no reason yet to think today would be different. Downstairs in the grand hall usually reserved for formal events, caterers were already setting up. It was for that evening's Founders' Day Gala. The sound of clinking glassware drifted faintly up through the building's floors. 2 events, unfolding under one roof, on a collision course neither side had fully anticipated. We'll begin, Director Cassidy said, calling the room to order. This hearing concerns an allegation of academic dishonesty against Nora Bellamy. Specifically, the discovery of unauthorized exam materials during a routine integrity sweep. She reviewed the basic facts for the record. The discovery, the timeline, the policy Nora had allegedly violated. Ms. Bellamy, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Nora stood, her voice steady despite the weight of every eye in the room. I do. I never possessed those materials knowingly. I believe they were placed in my backpack deliberately, by someone with a specific interest in seeing me removed from this campus. A faint murmur moved through the room. Preston Calloway's expression didn't change at all. though something behind his eyes sharpened slightly. "That's a serious accusation," Cassidy said. "Do you have evidence to support it?" "I do," Nora said. "And I have people here who can speak to it directly." One of the faculty representatives leaned forward slightly. He wore wire-rimmed glasses. "Ms. Bellamy, with respect, accusations of this nature are common in cases like this. Can you explain how the materials came to be in your possession?" "I can't say exactly when it happened," Nora admitted. "I left my backpack unattended briefly outside the gym locker room. That's the only window I'm aware of. A week is a long time to be certain of anything," the faculty representative said. "He wasn't unkind, just skeptical." "I understand that," Nora said, "which is why I'm not asking the committee to simply take my word for it." She glanced at Gerald Walsh, who stepped forward. His badge of a long retired career still carried weight in a room like this. "My name is Gerald Walsh," he said, "retired police officer, now working campus security. I have documentation regarding financial aid inquiries made against 2 students, both witnesses to events relevant to this case. Both inquiries traced to the same office extension." He set a folder on the table in front of the committee. "That extension belongs to Mr. Preston Calloway." The room went very still. Preston finally shifted in his seat, the first crack in his composure all afternoon. "This is outrageous," he said, voice controlled but sharp. "I have no idea what this man is implying. I've done nothing but support this institution for 15 years. "The call logs speak for themselves," Walsh said calmly. "I'm happy to walk the committee through them, extension by extension, timestamp by timestamp." Director Cassidy's expression had shifted into something far more alert. "We'll need to review that documentation carefully," she said. "This changes the scope of what we're discussing today considerably." The student representative on the committee cleared her throat. She was a serious young woman who had barely spoken until now. "If I may, there was also a video circulating weeks ago of an incident on the dormitory stairs. It was dismissed at the time as inconclusive. Has anyone re-examined that footage since?" "That's the other reason I'm here," said a voice from the doorway. At that moment, the hearing room door opened. A nervous young man stepped inside, a laptop bag slung over one shoulder. His eyes searched the room until they found Nora. "Oh, and I have something too," he said, his voice shaking slightly but steady enough to carry. "I should have brought it forward weeks ago. I'm sorry it took me this long." He set his laptop on the table, pulling up a video file. It was the same footage from the stairwell, cleaned up now, clear enough that every movement could be seen without doubt. The committee watched in silence as the video played. Dean Finch's deliberate shove, Nora's precise, controlled response, protecting Callie without a single wasted motion. The entire sequence, undeniable now in a way the blurry original had never been. "I was scared," Owen admitted once the video ended. "Someone made it clear my financial aid could be at risk if I got involved. I know now that's not something anyone should have been able to threaten me with." Director Cassidy looked at Walsh's folder, then at the video still frozen on Owen's laptop screen. Then finally at Preston Calloway, whose face had gone pale. It hadn't looked that way all afternoon. "Mr. Calloway," she said carefully, "I think it would be appropriate for you to step outside while this committee deliberates on next steps." Preston stood slowly, adjusting his jacket with hands that weren't quite as steady as before. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "I'm sure once the full picture is considered." His words trailed off. He realized, for the first time all day, that the room had stopped believing him. He walked out, and the hearing room fell into Ansit's waiting silence behind him. Director Cassidy called a short recess. It gave the committee time to review the new documentation properly. Students and witnesses filed out into the corridor to wait. The formal tension gave way to something looser, though no less charged. What happened next, nobody in that room could have fully predicted, least of all the people it happened to. Downstairs, the gala had already begun welcoming its first guests. Alumni and donors moved through the grand hall in evening wear. Waiters circled with trays of hors d'oeuvre. A string quartet played quietly near the far wall. Preston Calloway made his way down the main staircase. He forced his expression back into something composed, something that could still convince a room full of donors that everything was fine. He found Dean Finch near the coat check. Dean had been summoned by a single sharp text message. The grand hall glittered around them. Chandeliers threw warm light across polished floors. Guests laughed over champagne flutes, entirely unaware of the smaller drama upstairs. The hearing's falling apart, Preston said, low and urgent. There's a security guard with call logs. A video surfaced. I need this contained now. Dean's face went pale. Contained how? It's a gala. There's like 200 people down here. Get the laptop, Preston said, the one with the video. Whatever it takes. Dean hesitated only a moment before nodding. Some old loyalty to the Calloway name pushed him toward one final mistake. Or perhaps it was simple fear. He made his way back up to the second floor. He slipped into the hearing room corridor just as the committee took its recess. Students and witnesses stepped out into the hallway to wait. Callie stood near the water fountain. Owen's laptop bag was looped over her shoulder. He'd stepped away to take a call from his mother. He was reassuring her everything was fine. Dean approached quickly, grabbing for the bag before Callie fully registered what was happening. Give me that, he said, low and urgent. His composure was cracking under pressure that had been building all week. Callie yanked back instinctively, more startled than resistant. What are you doing? Dean pulled harder. For a moment, it looked like Callie might lose her footing entirely. The strap twisted painfully around her arm. Nora, standing just a few feet away, moved before the thought fully formed. 2 steps, a controlled pivot, and her hand closed firmly around Dean's wrist. She redirected the momentum of his pull away from Callie and off balance instead. He stumbled back against the wall, more shocked than hurt. The laptop bag fell safely to the floor between them. For a moment, nobody in the hallway moved. The string quartet's music drifted faintly up the stairwell from the gala below. It sounded oddly gentle against the sudden tension in the corridor. That's enough, Nora said, her voice calm but absolutely final. You've done enough today. A small crowd had gathered by then. Gala guests drawn upstairs by the commotion, students and faculty alike watching. Somewhere in that crowd, a phone was already recording. This time, nobody needed to clean up the footage afterward. It was clear from the very first frame. Grant pushed through the gathering crowd, his father close behind him. Both of them arrived just in time to see Dean sitting against the wall. Nora stood calm and unshaken in front of a small crowd of witnesses. Dean, Grant said, something breaking in his voice. What did you do? Dean's eyes darted past Grant to the man standing just behind him. Your father sent me, Dean said, scrambling to his feet, panic edging into his voice. He said, get the laptop, whatever it takes. The words landed in the hallway like a stone dropped into still water. Every head turned first toward Preston, then slowly toward Grant. For a long moment, Grant said nothing at all. His father's hand landed firmly on his shoulder from behind. Don't, Preston said quietly, only for his son. Say nothing, we'll handle this privately. Grant looked at his father's hand on his shoulder, the same hand that had steered so much of his life quietly, from a distance, always insisting on being handled instead of faced. He looked at Nora, calm in front of a crowd she never tried to gather. He looked at Callie, rubbing her wrist where the strap had twisted too hard. Something in him finally gave way, the way a dam gives way, once the pressure grows too great to hold. No, Grant said, shrugging his father's hand off his shoulder. I'm done doing this quietly. He turned to face the small crowd gathered in the hallway. His voice shook, but grew steadier with every word. I planted that answer key in her backpack, he said. I had Dean get access to a professor's office through a friend. It was my idea. My father told me to handle the situation before tonight, and I decided handling it meant destroying someone's reputation, instead of admitting I was embarrassed by a girl who never did anything wrong. Grant, Preston said sharply, that's enough. It's not enough, Grant said, turning to face him fully now. Something raw and exhausted broke through years of careful composure. It's never been enough. Nothing I do is ever enough, unless I win. You taught me that before I could even tie my own shoes. His voice cracked. For a moment, the confident football star looked simply young. The boy who had walked into a dining hall certain of his status looked tired. Finally, he looked honest. I don't even hate her, he said, looking at Nora now. I never did. I just didn't know how to lose without feeling worthless. So I made sure other people lost instead. He looked down at his hands, as though seeing them for the first time. My whole life, every game, every grade, it always came back to winning or losing. Never how I'd played. Never who I'd been while I was playing. His voice dropped lower. I got so used to that scoreboard, I started keeping one for everything, even for people. Nobody in the hallway spoke. Even Preston, for once, said nothing. "I'm not saying that to make this okay," Grant continued, looking back up at Nora. "What I did to you wasn't okay. What I let happen to Callie wasn't okay. I'm saying it because I think I finally understand why I did it. Understanding it doesn't undo a single bit of the harm." Callie, still holding her wrist, watched him. Something caught between anger and pity crossed her face. The hallway had gone completely silent. Gala guests and hearing witnesses alike were caught in a moment none would forget. Director Cassidy stepped into the doorway of the hearing room. She had heard enough through the open door to understand what had happened. "Mr. Calloway," she said to Preston, her voice carrying clearly through the hallway, "both of you, please come inside. I believe this committee has heard everything it needs to reach a decision today." The formal proceedings that followed took less than 20 minutes, though it felt like much longer to everyone standing in that room. The committee reviewed Walsh's documentation, the restored video, and Grant's public confession. They weighed it against a case that had, until an hour earlier, looked disturbingly solid. The faculty representative with the wire-rimmed glasses spoke first. He was the same man who had pressed Nora earlier about the timeline. The committee had returned from a brief private discussion. "For what it's worth," he said, looking directly at Nora, "I want to apologize for how skeptical I sounded earlier. In 15 years on this committee, I've never seen a case turn this completely. I'm glad it turned in the right direction." "Thank you," Nora said. "I understand why you needed to ask hard questions. That's part of doing this fairly." Director Cassidy read the findings aloud, her voice steady and clear. All charges against Nora Bellamy were dismissed. Her academic record was fully restored, her suspension lifted effective immediately. Grant Calloway was placed on formal disciplinary probation. He was required to complete a semester of community service, a public apology to Nora and the broader student body, as a condition of enrollment. Dean Finch faced separate discipline for his role in both the theft and the confrontation, a formal suspension pending further review. Preston Calloway's situation would be forwarded to the full Board of Trustees for review, given the evidence of improper interference in a student conduct proceeding, and the misuse of his position to pressure financial aid decisions. By the following week, that review would end with his resignation from the board entirely. A quiet fall from a position he had spent 15 years building, undone in the end not by conspiracy but by his own son. The story made the local paper 2 days later. A short piece buried on page 6 mostly focused on the financial aid impropriety. Preston Calloway offered no comment. His name came off the university's website within the month. Quietly, the way most falls from grace eventually are. Downstairs, the gala continued that evening, subdued but unstoppable, the way institutions often are. The dormitory funding announcement was quietly postponed. The half-finished building waited on a decision nobody wanted to rush again. Preston himself had already left, well before dessert was served. Upstairs in the now empty hearing room, Nora sat with her grandfather beside her. The adrenaline of the afternoon was finally starting to fade. "You did that," Silas said quietly. "All of it. I just showed up." "You showing up was half of it," Nora said. "The other half was 14 years of you teaching me not to fear this room." He smiled, reaching over to gently touch the pendant still hanging around her neck. The knot in its chain was worn rough from weeks of careful handling. "This needs fixing properly," he said. "Come on, let's get some air." They walked outside together, out onto the quad. A small group had gathered once word of the hearing's outcome spread through campus. Even Director Cassidy stepped out for a moment, coat already on for the evening. She caught Nora's eye across the quad and offered a small, genuine nod. "For what it's worth," she said, walking over. "I'm glad I was wrong to warn you." "You weren't wrong," Nora said. "The deck really was stacked. You just weren't the one stacking it." "No," Cassidy agreed. "But I let it happen under my roof longer than I should have. I'll be reviewing how we handle expedited requests going forward. That much I can promise you." "Thank you," Nora said, "for being honest with me, even when it wasn't easy." Cassidy nodded once, businesslike again, and disappeared back toward the parking lot. Callie was there, along with Owen, Professor Whitfield, and Gerald Walsh. They stood together in the cool evening air, beneath a sky showing its first stars. Silas took a small tool from his jacket pocket. He'd carried it for years for exactly this kind of quiet repair. He carefully fixed the broken clasp on Nora's pendant. He restored the fine silver chain to what it had been before. Before a careless hand had grabbed at it, he lifted it gently and fastened it back around her neck himself. The way he had the very first time, in a garage that smelled of chalk and old wood. "You didn't win today because you were stronger than any of them," he said. His voice was quiet enough that only the small circle around them could hear. "You won because you held on to who you were, the whole way through, even when it would have been easier to become someone else." Nora reached up, touching the pendant resting once more against her collarbone, whole again. "I couldn't have held on to it without you," she said. "That's the thing about the people who raise us," Silas said, voice thick with feeling. "We're not supposed to carry it alone. None of us were ever meant to." Callie stepped forward and hugged Nora tightly. Tears finally spilled over after weeks of held-back fear. "Thank you," she said. "For all of it. The stairs. Today. All of it." "You don't have to thank me," Nora said, echoing words she'd said once before, on a much harder day. "Anyone should have done it." "Not everyone would," Callie said again, the same words from months earlier, meaning them even more now than she had the first time. Owen shook Silas's hand, a little starstruck despite himself. "I'm really sorry it took me so long," he said. "I should have brought that video forward the first week." "You brought it forward when it counted," Silas said, shaking his hand warmly. "That's more than a lot of grown men manage in their whole lives. Don't spend too much time being hard on yourself for being young and scared. Everybody's been there." Owen nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders for the first time in weeks. Gerald Walsh clapped his old friend on the shoulder, the kind of gesture that carried 30 years of gratitude, finally allowed to surface. "Feels like old times," Walsh said, "minus the folding chairs and the bad coffee." "Give it time," Silas said, grinning. "I hear this town's got a decent diner. We could start a new Tuesday tradition." Walsh laughed, a real easy laugh, the kind that comes from finally closing a chapter left unfinished for far too long. Professor Whitfield stood a little apart, watching the small gathering with quiet satisfaction. She had the look of someone who had spent years studying quiet acts of courage. She had finally gotten to watch one unfold, right in front of her. "You know," she said, stepping closer to Nora, "I think I'm going to have to update my lecture notes. Turns out the ending to that research project just kept going, all these years later. Maybe leave out the part where I nearly failed out," Nora said, "over a folder I never touched." "Wouldn't dream of leaving that part out," Whitfield said. "It's the part that actually matters." "Thank you for one thing," Nora said, "for not pretending you didn't know his name." "I almost did," Whitfield admitted. "Some old habits die hard. Discretion becomes its own kind of armor. But watching you today, I realize silence has its limits too, even mine." Above them, the bell tower rang out the hour, slow and steady, the same sound that had greeted Nora on her very first evening at Millbrook, back when none of this had seemed possible. Before heading back to their dorms that night, Silas insisted on one more stop, the small diner downtown, where Nora and Callie had shared milkshakes weeks earlier. The bell over the door jingled the same way it always had. Some things, Nora thought, stayed exactly as they were always meant to stay. Some places just held on, no matter how much changed around them, year after year. Dottie was still behind the counter, same apron, same warm smile. Her eyebrows lifted in surprise at the size of the group filing into her booths. "Well, look at this crowd," she said, grabbing menus. "Somebody having a celebration?" "Something like that," Nora said. Dottie studied her, the way people who've read faces for a lifetime do. "You're the girl from a few weeks back, with the roommate. I remember. You looked like you were carrying something heavy that day." "I was," Nora admitted. "It's a little lighter now." "Good," Dottie said, patting the table the same way she had months earlier. "Whatever it was, I hope it stays that way." She took their order and disappeared toward the kitchen, humming something old and familiar under her breath. Silas looked around the little diner. He took in the cracked vinyl booths, the small American flags along the counter. The smell of coffee and grilled onions belonged to small towns exactly like this one. "I like this place," he said. "Reminds me of the one back home, the one your grandmother liked on Sunday mornings, before you were born." "You don't talk about her much," Nora said quietly. "Not much left to say that words do justice to," Silas said. "But she'd have liked watching you tonight, standing your ground the way you did. She always said the quiet ones end up surprising everybody eventually." Nora smiled, filing that away carefully. Another small piece of family history, one she was still learning to hold on to. Before Silas left that night, he pulled her into one more hug outside the diner. "I'll see you at Thanksgiving," he said. "Bring Callie, if she doesn't have anywhere else to go." "She'd like that," Nora said. "She talks about your cooking like it's already legendary." "It's just chili," Silas said, feigning modesty. "Though I do make a good chili." "The best," Nora said. "Drive safe. Text me when you're home." "Always do." He squeezed her shoulder once, then climbed into his truck. She watched his taillights disappear down Main Street, the diner's neon sign glowing behind her. For the first time in weeks, the road ahead didn't feel uncertain. It just felt like the ordinary kind of unknown, one everyone learns to live with. In the weeks that followed, Millbrook College settled slowly back into its normal rhythms. Coach Merritt found Nora after her wellness class one afternoon in early December. It was the same gym where he'd first seen her dodge that stray ball. "Heard the whole story eventually," he said, leaning against the wall near the equipment closet. "Figured there was more to that dodge than gymnastics." 14 years of training," Nora said. "My grandfather would probably say it was never really about the dodging at all." Merritt nodded slowly, studying her with something like professional curiosity. "You ever consider coaching? Self-defense clinics, maybe? We get requests for that kind of thing from the Women's Center every semester." Never had anyone qualified to run one properly. Nora hadn't expected the question, but she found herself considering it seriously. "Let me think about it," she said. "I think my grandfather would like that idea, more than anything else I could tell him." "No rush," Merritt said. "Just wanted to plant the seed. You've got a gift for this. Feels like a waste to let it just sit there." Nora thought about that walking back to her dorm afterward. A gift for this. She'd never once thought of it that way. To her, it had always just been survival, dressed up as discipline. Maybe those two things weren't as far apart as she'd assumed. She mentioned it to Callie that night, half expecting her to brush it off. Instead, Callie's eyes lit up immediately. "You'd be incredible at that," she said. "I'd sign up on day one." "You've already had the crash course," Nora said, laughing. "On a staircase, no less." "Still counts," Callie said. "Best class I never officially registered for." By spring, the idea had turned into something real. Nora taught her first self-defense session on a Saturday morning in April. 12 women showed up, ranging from freshmen to a few staff members. Callie sat in the front row, grinning the entire time. Nora was nervous before it started, more nervous than she'd expected to be. But once she began, the nerves fell away, the same way they always had. "Watch your feet," she told the room, echoing a voice she'd carried her whole life. "Not your fists. The feet tell you everything." She caught herself smiling as she said it. Somewhere 3 hours away, she imagined her grandfather smiling too. After class, one of the freshmen lingered by the door, hesitant to leave. "Can I ask you something?" the girl said. "Weren't you scared? Standing up like that back in the fall?" Nora considered the question honestly, the way it deserved, every single time, she said. "Scared and steady aren't opposites. You can be both at once." The girl nodded slowly, like she was filing that away for later. "I hope I can be both someday." "You already are," Nora said. "You showed up today. That's most of it, right there." The girl smiled and headed out into the April sunshine. Nora watched her go, feeling something settle into place. It had nothing to do with training at all. Grant Calloway completed his community service quietly. He worked most weekends at a local youth center, an assignment that started as punishment. It became, somewhere along the way, something closer to genuine understanding. He worked mostly with middle schoolers who'd been struggling in one way or another. Kids whose home lives looked a little too familiar to him for comfort. One afternoon in November, a boy missed the final shot of a scrimmage game. He burst into tears, certain his father would be disappointed watching from the sideline. Grant knelt down next to him, an unfamiliar tightness in his own chest. "Hey," he said. "You know what I remember about every game I ever won?" The boy shook his head, wiping his eyes. "Almost nothing," Grant admitted. "Not the score. Not the plays. But I remember every single time somebody was proud of me just for trying hard. Win or lose, that's the stuff that actually sticks around. It wasn't a perfect fix. Old habits, especially ones handed down from a father, rarely disappear in a single season. But it was a start, the kind Grant hadn't known he was capable of. He apologized to Nora publicly, at a student assembly he'd insisted on attending, even after the committee said a written statement would suffice. It wasn't a polished speech. It wasn't meant to be. I spent my whole life afraid of losing, he told the room. His voice was steady despite the crowd. I'm still learning that losing well might be the only winning that matters. Nora accepted his apology, not because it erased what had happened. She understood what it cost a person to stand and admit they'd been wrong. Preston Calloway's name came down from the plaque outside the dormitory a few months later. It was replaced eventually by funding from a coalition of smaller donors, none of whom demanded their name on anything at all. Nora finished the semester with the highest marks of her college career so far. Her suspension was nothing more than a footnote in a permanent record fully restored. She kept running along the river path most mornings. The pendant swung gently against her chest, whole again, exactly where it belonged. Callie's scholarship concerns, once weaponized against her, were reviewed and cleared within days. An apology letter from financial aid was tucked into her file with the resolution. She started volunteering at the same women's center Coach Merritt had mentioned. She helped run study sessions for other scholarship students still finding their footing, the same way Nora had once helped her. I used to think needing help meant something was wrong with me, Callie said. The two of them were studying by lamplight in their room. Now I think it just means you're paying attention to who's around you. Owen changed his major that spring, from computer science to something closer to digital forensics. A shift he credited to 2 weeks in October that taught him about courage. Turns out cleaning up shaky video footage is a marketable skill, he told Nora. It was at the end of year gathering their dorm hosted. He grinned for the first time in a long while. Who knew? Gerald Walsh retired fully from campus security that spring. He still showed up most Tuesday evenings at the local community center. He ran a free self-defense clinic for anyone willing to walk through the door. Silas drove up more often than either of them probably needed to admit. The two old friends picked up a partnership 30 years interrupted, teaching balance and patience to a new generation, the same way they'd once learned it. Nora sat in on one of those Tuesday sessions during winter break. She watched her grandfather correct a teenager's stance with the same quiet patience. "Watch your feet," he told the boy. "Not your fists. The feet tell you everything." She smiled, recognizing every word. She understood now, in a way she hadn't as a child, how much he'd poured into that lesson. Professor Whitfield published a short follow-up piece that spring. It was an update to her original research on community self-defense programs. This time, with Silas's permission, it mentioned the granddaughter who carried his lessons forward. On her own, she never named the college or the incident that had made it necessary. Some stories, she wrote, matter more for what they teach than who gets credit. And on the last night before winter break, snow finally started to fall. Sitting with Callie in their dorm room, Nora found herself thinking about something. Something her grandfather had told her, on a training mat, in a garage that shaped who she'd become. You don't learn to fight to hurt people. You learn so you never have to be afraid of anyone. She understood now, in a way she hadn't before that long, difficult semester, that the lesson had never really been about fighting at all. It had been about this, about choosing, again and again, to stand beside the people who needed you, quietly, patiently, for as long as it took. Until the truth finally had the chance to catch up. She thought about Grant too, in a way she hadn't expected. Weeks later, she still didn't excuse what he'd done. Some things couldn't be fully excused, only understood, and even then only partly. But she found herself thinking about the boy at the youth center, missing his shot, terrified of his father's disappointment. About a version of Grant who might have grown up entirely differently if just one adult had told him losing well was its own kind of winning. Maybe that was the last lesson her grandfather's whole philosophy had been quietly teaching her, longer than she'd realized. Strength wasn't only about protecting the people who'd been wronged. Sometimes it was about extending a little grace to the people who'd done the wronging. Once they finally found the courage to stop, Callie glanced up, catching the thoughtful look on Nora's face. "What are you thinking about?" "Just how much can change in one semester," Nora said. "Feels like I've lived about 3 separate lives since September." "You kind of have," Callie said, smiling, "though I'm glad this particular version of you decided to stick around." "Me too," Nora said, and meant it completely, in a way she hadn't been sure she would, back on that first hard morning. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and steady, dusting the quad in white. It blanketed a campus that had spent one long, difficult autumn learning something, something most students would carry with them, long after they'd forgotten their classes. That real strength rarely announces itself with noise. It shows up quietly, patiently, again and again, for exactly as long as it takes. And sometimes, the person everyone underestimates is the reason a whole community remembers itself. Remembers how to stand up straight. Some people mistake patience for weakness. They rarely make that mistake twice.